My name is Nadia Osei. I'm 43 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that being a good daughter meant never asking for anything in return. I want to tell you something before we go any further. The moment that changed everything for me didn't happen in a hospital. It didn't happen during a phone call. It happened in a bank, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, when a young teller slid a piece of paper across the counter and told me, with genuine sympathy in her eyes, that the account no longer existed. I stood there for a moment, just stood there, the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from the body protecting itself. I thanked her. I picked up my bag. I walked out into the afternoon sun and got into my car. I sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the clock on my dashboard the entire time. The account had been closed. Not suspended. Not frozen. Closed. Completely. And the $11,000 I had transferred just 3 weeks earlier, money I had saved carefully over 8 months, money I had planned to use toward a down payment on a small apartment of my own, was gone. When I got home, I sat on my couch without turning on any lights. My apartment felt very quiet. I picked up my phone and opened my messages with my mother. I scrolled up slowly. There it was, from 3 days ago. My message? Mom, please confirm you received the transfer. 2 blue ticks. She had read it. No reply. I set the phone down on the cushion beside me. I didn't cry. That surprised me later, when I thought about it. But in that moment, I had no tears. Just that stillness. That terrible, familiar stillness. I want to tell you the full number, because it matters. Over 6 years, I sent my parents $144,000. Not in one amount. In careful monthly transfers, on an emergency wire payments in, don't worry, I'll handle it moments. For rent. For my father's medical tests. For my brother Daniel's university fees. For household expenses my mother described as urgent. Every transfer made in trust. Every single one. And what I discovered, after that afternoon in the bank, after weeks of quiet investigation, was this. A significant portion of that money I had given from my salary, from my savings, from the years of my life that I worked overtime and skipped holidays and told myself that this was what love looked like, had been used by my parents to purchase land. Land registered entirely in my brother's name. I was never told. I was never consulted. I was never even thanked in a way that acknowledged the real scale of what I had given. I was not robbed by strangers. I was carefully, quietly, and lovingly emptied by the people who called me their blessing. And if you have ever felt used by someone you trusted completely, stay with me. This story is for you. My name is Nadia Osei. I'm 43 years old. I was born the eldest child in a family of 5. My parents, my younger brother Daniel, my younger sister Priya, and me. We grew up in a working-class neighborhood where the houses were small and the expectations were large. My father worked as a government clerk. My mother managed the home. They were not cruel people. I want to say that clearly, because this story is not about monsters. It is about something quieter and more complicated than that. My parents cared deeply about how we looked to others. Our clothes were always pressed. Our grades were always shown to relatives. At family events, my mother smiled and said everything was fine, even when it wasn't. Appearance was currency in our household, and I, as the eldest, was expected to contribute to that appearance in every way possible. By the time I was 10 years old, I cooked dinner on the nights my mother was tired. I helped Priya with her reading. I reminded Daniel about his homework. I didn't resent it then. It felt normal. It felt like my place. My mother used to put her hand on my shoulder and say, "You are my strong girl. You don't need as much as the others." I remember feeling proud when she said that. It took me 30 years to understand that it was not a compliment, it was an instruction. Daniel was the youngest son. In our family, or in our culture, that carried a particular kind of weight. He was given more patience when he made mistakes, more pocket money when he asked, more freedom to simply be a child without being asked to carry anything. I noticed. Children always notice. But when I mentioned it once, carefully, my mother looked at me with a kind of tired disappointment and said, "Boys need different things." I never mentioned it again. Priya and I were close in our own quiet way. She was softer than me, Hugh more emotional, and I protected her from things without either of us naming what I was doing. But even in that closeness, I was always the one standing slightly outside the warmth, making sure everyone else was inside it. That was our family. Not broken, not violent. Just quietly, consistently arranged in a way that placed my needs at the bottom of the list. And because it happened gradually, across years, I accepted it as simply the way things were, the way I was. Have you ever looked back at your childhood and realized that what felt normal at the time was actually teaching you something that would cost you dearly later? That is the question I've sat with for a long time now. I was 17 when I won a regional academic award. My school called the house on a Friday afternoon. I answered, and then I handed the phone to my mother with my heart beating fast because I was proud. I wanted her to be proud. She listened. She said, "That's nice." She handed the phone back. Then she went back to the television program she'd been watching. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went to my room and finished my homework. The following week, Daniel passed a mathematics test he had failed twice before. Not an excellent score, a passing one. My parents bought him a new bicycle, a red one with reflective handles. My father took a photograph of him sitting on it in front of the house. The photograph sat on the shelf in the living room for years. I passed that shelf every day. I did not say anything then. What would I have said? The feeling was not yet something I had words for. It was more like a small, persistent ache, the kind you learn to breathe around. When I finished secondary school, I applied to a university 2 cities away. I was accepted. I was genuinely happy. I told my father over dinner, and he looked at me with what I now recognize as guilt, though I didn't recognize it then. He said, carefully, that money was very tight, that perhaps a local school would be better, that there was no shame in staying close to home. I agreed. I found a local program. I took a part-time job at a shop near the school. I applied for a student loan. I put myself through 4 years of university largely on my own effort. My parents helped occasionally with small amounts. I never complained. 6 years later, Daniel was accepted into a university. My parents paid his fees in full, without hesitation, without a loan. I didn't know, at the time, where that money had come from. I was abroad by then, sending money home, believing it was going to household necessities. I found out much later that some of it was sitting in an account, being saved, for Daniel's future. At family gatherings during those years, relatives would greet me warmly and then immediately ask about my job, my salary, whether I was sending enough home. But I was always introduced as the one who works abroad, a practical piece of information, a financial fact. No one asked what I wanted to do with my life. No one asked if I was happy. I was a resource to be referenced, not a person to be known. I don't describe any of this with anger. I've moved past the anger. What I feel now, looking back, is a kind of sorrowful clarity. The reliable child is rarely celebrated. She is simply relied upon. And if she's taught early enough that love comes through usefulness, she will keep being useful long past the point where it begins to hollow her out. I moved abroad at 29. I had worked hard to get there. I found a stable position in project management at a mid-sized firm. I lived in a modest apartment. cooked my own meals, kept my expenses small, and every month without fail, I sent money home. At first, it was a comfortable amount. Then the needs grew. In the first year, my father had a health scare, a cardiac episode that was, thankfully, not a full heart attack, but serious enough to require tests and medication and some changes to the house. I sent money immediately. I didn't calculate. I didn't negotiate. He was my father. He needed help. I sent what was needed and I told him not to worry. The total that year, just over $14,000. In the second year, Daniel was accepted into a university program. My parents called me on a Sunday. I remember the call because the tone was celebratory, and I was happy for my brother. No one asked if I could contribute. There was a brief pause after the announcement, and then my mother said, "You'll help, of course." Not a question, a certainty. I said yes. I always said yes. That year, I sent roughly $19,000, covering both regular household expenses and Daniel's fees. Year 3 brought a different kind of emergency. Nay, and my parents had fallen behind on rent for their new place, a house they had moved to without consulting me, but which my mother described as necessary for my father's health. 4 months of missed payments. I covered it. I also covered the moving costs they hadn't mentioned until after the move was done. $22,000 that year. By year 4, I had developed a kind of rhythm. I sent money the way some people pay a mortgage, faithfully, automatically, without question. And I told myself that this was what family meant, that sacrifice was not a loss, but an investment, that one day when things settled, things would be different. Between the transfers, there was silence. Not always, but mostly. My birthday would pass with a short text, sometimes none at all. I called them. I checked in. I asked about my father's health, about Priya's children, about whether the roof had been repaired. They answered my questions. They did not ask many in return. And I told myself they were tired, that they were older, that this was simply how our family communicated. I kept reaching across the distance. In year 5, my mother mentioned that Priya needed financial help after a difficult period. I sent what I could, on top of the regular amounts. In year 6, there were medical follow-ups for my father, school fees for Priya's children that my parents had quietly promised to cover, and ongoing household costs that never seemed to decrease. And I kept a loose mental tally, but I never added it all up formally. I didn't want to. Something in me was afraid of what the number would feel like if I saw it clearly. Then came the final transfer. I had been saving for 2 years for a small apartment, a down payment, something of my own. I was 39 years old and I had never owned anything with my name on it. I had saved $11,000 toward that goal. Then my mother called to say there was a problem with the household account, something urgent, something she couldn't explain fully over the phone, but that needed immediate attention. I asked a few questions. She answered them vaguely. I sent the 11,000. The decision was made in love. Real love. That is the part that I need you to understand. I was not naive. I was not stupid. I was simply someone who had been taught from childhood that her love was best expressed through giving. And so I gave. One more time. That was 3 weeks before the afternoon in the bank. I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it honestly. Have you ever given so much of yourself for so long that you lost track of where generosity ended and self-erasure began? Because I didn't notice the line. Not until it was far behind me. The visit home was something I had looked forward to for months. 2 years had passed since I'd been back. I had taken 2 weeks off work. I packed carefully. I brought small gifts. I landed at the airport feeling a warmth that I realize now was a kind of longing, the longing of a person who has been away from belonging for a very long time. The house looked good. Better than I expected. New curtains. A repainted front step. My mother hugged me at the door, and the smell of cooking came from inside, and for a moment I felt like a daughter arriving home. It was a good feeling. I held on to it. Daniel was there. He looked well, relaxed. He greeted me from the couch with a brief smile and went back to his phone. I noticed but chose not to hold it. The first day passed gently. We ate together. We talked about small things: the neighborhood, my father's latest checkup results, Priya's children. I laughed at an old family story my father told. I helped my mother in the kitchen and felt, for a brief time, that perhaps I had built this tension up in my mind and that things were simply normal. Then came the second day, and we were having lunch. My father's older sister, Auntie Rose, had come to visit. She was in her late 70s, warm and talkative, the kind of woman who speaks her thoughts as they arrive without editing them. Somewhere between the soup and the main dish, she leaned across the table and said to no one in particular, "Daniel's land in the south is looking very good now. My cousin says the value has already gone up." I looked up from my plate. Daniel didn't respond. He kept eating. My mother became very interested in the salt shaker. My father cleared his throat and said something about the weather. I didn't react. I kept eating. I kept my face neutral. But something had shifted. I noticed that no one looked at me, and that very deliberate not looking told me more than words could have. Later that afternoon, when Auntie Rose had gone and the house was quieter, I found my mother in the kitchen. I said casually, as if I had just remembered it, "Mom, what land was Auntie Rose talking about? Somewhere in the south?" The pause that followed was exactly 1 second too long. "Oh, that's just a small piece of land. Something your father arranged." "Arranged how?" "It's in Daniel's name. For his future. You know how these things work." I kept my voice even. "When was this?" "A while ago. It's not a big thing." But it was. I could feel it. I walked to the living room. On the kitchen counter, and I had noticed earlier a folded document that I hadn't looked at. I didn't look at it then either, but I went back later when the house was quiet and I read it. It was a receipt, a formal purchase acknowledgement for a parcel of land. The amount listed was substantial. The registration was in Daniel's full name. The date was 18 months ago. I sat with that paper in my hand for a long time. That evening, I found my father on the porch. I sat beside him. I tried, 3 times, to bring the conversation toward what I had read. Each time he shifted the subject. Once to my health, once to my work, once to a neighbor's story I had no connection to. He was not a man who lied easily, but he was very good at not answering. I went to my room. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed. The room smelled like the fabric softener my mother had always used, that particular floral scent that had meant home to me since childhood. Now it sat differently in my lungs. I did not scream. I did not cry. I sat very still and I let myself understand. No one had lied to my face. No one had looked at me and said, "We are taking your money for your brother." They had simply not told me the truth. And in a family where I had been taught from childhood not to ask too many questions, not to need too much, not to make things uncomfortable, that omission had been easy to maintain. I heard my mother's footsteps in the hall, a knock on the door. "Nadia, dinner's ready." I took a breath. I washed my face. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment. Then I opened the door. "Coming," I said. I sat at the table. I ate. I smiled when something was said that called for a smile. I passed the bread when it was needed. I was completely present and completely somewhere else at the same time. Something had shifted in me that evening. Quietly. Permanently. Like a door that closes softly but locks from the inside. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water and my laptop, and I began to look at everything I had. I opened my bank records. 6 years of them. I went through every international transfer one by one, and I created a simple spreadsheet: date, amount, stated reason. I worked slowly and I didn't rush. I wanted to be certain. I wanted to see it clearly. When I finished, I sat back and looked at the total: $144,000. I had known the number was large. I had never seen it in one place before, in my own handwriting in a single column, adding up to that. Seeing it written down was different from knowing it. It was like finally looking directly at something you had been standing next to for years. I closed the laptop. I didn't look at the number again that night. Over the following days, I contacted Auntie Rose carefully. I told her I was trying to understand some family financial arrangements and asked if she knew more about the land. She didn't know she was telling me anything significant. She simply told me what she knew. The land was purchased 18 months ago. The price had been considerable. There was no mortgage, no loan. It was paid in cash, outright. I sat with that information for a long time. Then I made 3 decisions. The first decision? I stopped all transfers. Immediately. Completely. No announcement. No explanation. Not yet. I simply stopped. And the second decision? I called a financial advisor I had met through a colleague. I explained my situation in broad terms. She helped me understand exactly where I stood. The picture was uncomfortable. 6 years of sending money abroad had left my personal savings very thin. The down payment money was gone. I had very little cushion. She helped me make a plan. A real one. The third decision was more personal. I opened a notebook, one I had bought years ago and never used, and I began to write a letter to my parents. Not to send, just to say, finally, everything I had never allowed myself to say. I wrote about the academic award and the red bicycle. I wrote about putting myself through university alone. I wrote about every transfer, every "don't worry," every birthday that passed without a call. I wrote for 2 hours. My handwriting started neat and became less so as I went further. When I finished, I closed the notebook and held it for a moment. Yet I was not angry in the way I expected to be. I was something calmer than anger and deeper than sadness. I was clear. For the first time in my adult life, I was fully, quietly clear. Her name was Margaret. We had worked together for 4 years before we became the kind of friends who could say difficult things to each other. She was a few years younger than me, practical and perceptive, the kind of person who remembered small details and never made you feel embarrassed for being human. I called her on a Saturday morning. I told her I needed to talk about something and that it might take a while. She said, "Come over." I did. I told her everything. The full story. The 6 years of transfers. The land. The document on the counter. The number in the spreadsheet. I spoke for almost 40 minutes without stopping. Margaret listened without interrupting. She kept her eyes on me the whole time. She didn't look away, didn't check her phone, didn't shift in her seat, and she simply listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "What do you want to happen?" I stared at her. In 43 years, no one had ever asked me that question in quite that way. Not about something this big. Not in this context. I said, "I'm not sure yet." She nodded. "That's okay, but I want you to think about it. Not what your family would want. Not what would keep the peace. What you want." Margaret helped me organize my documents over the next few days. She sat beside me at my kitchen table while I printed bank records and arranged them in order. She was not a dramatic presence. She didn't tell me I deserved better, not in the way people say it without meaning it. She helped me practically, and that practical help felt more like love than almost anything I could remember. She also said something I've thought about many times since. She said, "Nadia, this pattern didn't start with the money. The money is just the most recent version of something that's been happening since you were a child. You were taught to give without being asked. You were taught that your needs were secondary. The money is the result of that teaching. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, I know. And I did know. I had known for a while. I just hadn't said it out loud before. Margaret also told me something else. She told me that my extended family, the aunts and uncles and cousins who gathered at events and sent holiday messages, had been told, indirectly, that I helped the family a little when I could. A little when I could. The full picture of what I had contributed had been deliberately understated. And in that understatement, my parents had preserved their image while quietly managing mine. Margaret said, "The truth being known is not cruelty, it's just honesty." She said it gently, without pushing. She understood that the decision was mine. I sat with that for several days. I thought about it while I cooked, while I walked to work, while I lay awake at 3 in the morning in the way you do when something important is waiting for you to resolve it. I didn't plan what happened next. It came to me as an opportunity, and I recognized it when it arrived. My cousin Fiona was engaged. The celebration was a family gathering at a relative's home, in a Sunday afternoon event with perhaps 30 people present. Parents, siblings, aunts and uncles, family friends who had known all of us since childhood. I was invited and I decided to attend. I dressed carefully that morning. Not to impress, to feel steady. I chose something simple and well-fitted in a dark green that I liked. I drove to the venue with the windows down and the radio low. The gathering was warm. There was food and music at a moderate volume, and the particular noise of a family event that feels larger than it actually is. I greeted people. I congratulated Fiona. I sat at a table with Auntie Rose and 2 cousins, and we talked about ordinary things. At some point in the early afternoon, my father was speaking with a group of relatives nearby. I wasn't trying to listen, but the room was small and his voice carried. He was talking about Daniel's new plans, about the property investment, about the future. He said, with genuine pride, "We worked hard as a family to make sure our son had a foundation." Several people nodded. Someone congratulated him. An aunt added, "That's how it should be. Children who succeed should give back to the family." She didn't look at me when she said it. I don't think she meant it as a statement directed at me, but I felt it land in my chest like something solid. I waited. The conversation moved on. A few people drifted away from that group. There was a natural pause in the noise of the room, the kind that happens at gatherings when everyone briefly reaches the end of a thought at the same moment. I spoke. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke in the same tone I would use to share a piece of news at a work meeting. Clear. Even. Present. I'm glad we're celebrating today. I love Fiona, and I'm happy for her. I paused for just a moment. I also want to share something, since so many of the people I care about are in the same room. I think it's important for this to be known. The nearest conversations quieted. People turned, not dramatically, but with the natural attention that comes when someone speaks with a certain kind of quiet intention. Over the past 6 years, I sent my family $144,000. I did this in monthly transfers and in emergency payments, for reasons that were presented to me as household needs, medical costs, and educational expenses. I gave this money willingly, because I trusted my family and I wanted to help. The room was quite still now. I recently learned that a significant portion of that money was used to purchase land, which has been registered in my brother Daniel's name. I was not told about this purchase. I was not consulted. And I was not included in any conversation about how the money I sent was ultimately being used. I did not look at my parents directly. I looked at a space in the middle of the room, somewhere between all of them. I'm not telling this story for drama. I'm telling it because the truth matters to me, and because I have spent a very long time being silent about things that should have been said. I sat down. The silence that followed was the fullest silence I had ever heard. It was not empty. It was loaded with 30 people all processing the same information at the same moment. My mother began to speak. Her voice was careful, controlled, the voice she used when she wanted to manage a situation. She started to explain that the land was for the whole family, that it was an investment for everyone's future. A couple of relatives nodded uncertainly. A couple more looked at the floor. My father said nothing. He looked at the table in front of him with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was not anger. It was something closer to shame. Daniel, sitting 2 seats away from my father, said nothing at all. And I sat in my chair and I did not rescue anyone. I did not say, "It's all right." I did not say, "I'm sure you meant well." I did not reach out to smooth it over or fill the silence or make anyone more comfortable. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, and I let the truth be present in the room for as long as it needed to be. That restraint, that small, quiet act of not reaching out to fix it, was the hardest thing I had ever done in that family's presence. And it was the most important. In the days that followed, my phone held a series of conversations I had not anticipated. Auntie Rose called on Monday. She said she was sorry she hadn't known the full picture. She said she hoped I was all right. I thanked her. A cousin I had not spoken to in 2 years sent a message saying that what I had shared was brave and that she respected me for saying it. I replied simply, "Thank you." My father's older brother, Uncle Thomas, called on Wednesday evening. He spoke carefully, choosing his words. He said he had always felt that things were not balanced in our family, but that he had not felt it was his place to speak. He said he was sorry he had not said something sooner. We talked for 20 minutes. It was the most honest conversation I had ever had with a member of my father's family. These conversations were not triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. What I felt was something more like being seen, after years of being looked past. My mother called on Thursday. Her voice was tight. She said I had humiliated the family. She said I was being ungrateful. She said the land was meant for all of us, that one day I would understand. I listened to everything she said. I did not argue. When she finished, I said calmly, "Mom, I understand that you see it differently. I need some time and some space right now." She said something else that I don't need to repeat here. I said goodbye, and I put the phone down. 2 weeks later, my father called. Alone. Not with my mother. And the call was short. He did not apologize, not directly, not in the full and complete way that would have been honest. But his voice was quiet in a way it had never been before. He asked how I was doing. He said he hoped I was taking care of myself. There was a long pause at one point, the kind that holds something unspoken inside it, something he didn't have the language for yet. I said I was well. I meant it. Daniel did not call. I was not surprised. I don't think I expected him to. But I noticed the silence where his voice might have been, and I let myself feel it for a moment, and then I let it go. The power that shifted during this time was not over my family. I gained no authority over them, no legal victory, no formal acknowledgement. What shifted was entirely internal. I stopped waiting for them to validate what I had experienced. I stopped checking my phone for a message that would confirm that I was right, that my pain was real, that what happened mattered. I already knew all of those things. I didn't need them to agree. My financial advisor and I made a concrete plan. I was starting over in many ways, at 43, with less than I should have had. But I was starting from a place of complete honesty about where I stood. And that honesty felt more stable than the comfortable confusion I had been living in. The apartment I had postponed for 6 years was now a goal I was working toward with clear eyes and a real savings plan. I set up an automatic deposit each month into a dedicated account with only my name on it. The first time I saw that deposit clear, I held my phone and looked at the number for a long time. It was a small amount. It was entirely mine. I have been asked, since sharing pieces of this story with a few people I trust, whether I regret telling the truth at the gathering, whether it was worth it, whether I worry about the damage done to the family's relationships. My answer is always the same. I don't regret it. Not because it was painless, but because it was necessary. Truth that is held inside too long doesn't stay still. It changes you. It makes you smaller. It teaches you to walk carefully around your own experience. And I was tired of being small. I want to be honest with you about where I am now. I am not fully healed. I don't think healing is something you finish. It's something you practice. Every day, I make small choices that my younger self would not have been allowed to make. I eat what I want for dinner without calculating whether someone else's hunger is more important. I spend a Saturday morning doing something I enjoy without a voice in my head, asking whether I've done enough for others first. I answer phone calls when I want to, and I let them go to voicemail when I need to. These are small things. They are also enormous things. Are the $144,000 is gone. I am not going to recover it. There is no legal path I want to pursue, no negotiation I want to enter. That chapter of giving is closed. And while I grieve what it cost me, not just financially but in time and in deferred living, I also recognize that I gave it from a real place. Some of those transfers went to real needs. My father's health mattered to me. Priya's children mattered to me. The love was real even when the framework around it was not. What I have gained from seeing the truth clearly is the ability to distinguish between love freely given and love that is expected and extracted. That distinction, once you learn to see it, changes everything. If you are someone who has spent years being the strong one, the responsible one, the one no one worries about, I want to say something to you directly, not as advice, just as one person who has been there, speaking to another. The reason no one worries about you is not because you are fine. It is because you were taught to seem fine. You were taught, early and consistently, that your needs were less urgent than your usefulness, that your worth came from what you contributed, not from who you were. And because you were taught that, you believed it. And because you believed it, you kept giving, long past the point where you had given enough. That teaching was wrong. It was always wrong. And recognizing that it was wrong is not a betrayal of your family. It is not ingratitude. It is simply the first honest thing you are allowed to say about your own life. Tell me in the comments, has anyone ever asked you what you want? Not what you can give, not what you can handle, not what the family needs from you, what you want. Because if the answer is that you can't remember the last time someone asked, I understand that more than you know. Several weeks after the gathering, on a Saturday morning in early spring, I went to a small coffee shop near my apartment. I had no plans for the afternoon, no transfers to organize, no calls to make that I hadn't already decided to make. I ordered a tea and a piece of cake that I had wanted to try for months. I sat by the window where the light came in at an angle across the table. I opened a book I had bought 3 weeks earlier and hadn't had a quiet moment to begin. I read for 2 hours. A woman at the next table had a conversation in another language that was pleasant background sound. A child at the counter was choosing between 2 pastries with tremendous seriousness. The light shifted as clouds moved outside. At some point, I looked up from my book and I noticed something. I felt like a person, not a provider, not a resource, not the reliable one, the one who handles things, the one who is always fine. Just a person, sitting in a coffee shop, reading a book, on a quiet Saturday morning. I had not felt that in a very long time. Maybe I had never felt it exactly that clearly before. I paid my bill. I walked home through the spring air. And I thought about the version of me who, 6 years ago, would have been sitting at her kitchen table on a Saturday morning, calculating the next transfer, reading a message from her mother about a new need, setting her own plans aside for the 11th time. I felt a tenderness toward that woman. Not pity. Tenderness. She had worked so hard. She had loved so much. She had given from the deepest part of herself. She just hadn't been taught yet that she was allowed to keep some of that for herself. I know now. If this story has touched something real in you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment if you've ever been in a place where your love was taken for granted. Your story matters. You matter. I lost $144,000. But I found something worth far more than that. I found the version of me that finally knew she was enough,